The morning light spilled through the wide glass windows of the Manhattan office, a pale gold shimmer gliding over chrome tables and half-empty coffee cups. Olivia Hart stood near the window, her reflection framed by the skyline, sharp, composed, and almost painfully beautiful in her navy suit. Beneath that calm exterior, however, her heart was thundering with adrenaline. Today wasn't just another day in advertising. It was the day she would sign an $800 million partnership with Synaxis Tech, one of the most powerful conglomerates in America. The office buzzed behind her assistants with clipboards, executives rehearsing speeches, a PR team double-checking camera angles for the press event. Olivia's assistant, Lauren, rushed in, clutching a tablet. They just confirmed the CEO of Synaxis will be attending in person. No one's seen him publicly in months. Olivia barely looked up. Good. If he's as mysterious as they say, he'll want this deal to speak for itself. But even as she said it, a flicker of curiosity brushed through her. Synaxis' CEO was practically a ghost, a reclusive figure known only by name, Daniel Reeves. He had built the company from the ground up, turning a small startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Yet he'd managed to keep his face hidden from the public eye. Rumors painted him as ruthless, brilliant, detached, the type of man Olivia despised. She glanced at the clock, 9:45 a.m., 10 minutes until she'd face the entire board, the cameras, the scrutiny. She drew a slow breath, then picked up her phone. There was a text from her husband. Daniel, you'll do amazing today. I'm proud of you, Liv. She smiled faintly at the nickname, the one he'd used since their college days. Daniel, her steady, quiet husband, who handled numbers and portfolios and spoke softly when she came home late. He wasn't rich, but he was kind, thoughtful. He grounded her when the world around her spun too fast. She typed back, "Thank you. Dinner tonight? Just us?" A bubble appeared, then vanished. No reply. She sighed, slipped the phone into her purse, and walked toward the conference room. The signing ceremony took place in the glass atrium of Synaxis headquarters, a cathedral of steel and sunlight in downtown New York. Journalists filled the seats. Cameras flashed. A grand piano played something soft and modern. Olivia stood at the podium beside a tall display of digital screens that projected her company's new slogan, "Creating Tomorrow Together." Her speech went smoothly. Her voice, low and precise, carried easily across the hall. Applause followed, polite and expectant. She shook hands with executives, feeling the weight of achievement in her chest. Years of struggle, ambition, and long nights had brought her here. Then the MC announced, "And now, to celebrate this historic partnership, please welcome the CEO of Synaxis Technologies, Mr. Daniel Reeves." The world froze. The crowd turned toward the stage as a man stepped forward from behind the curtain. He wore a charcoal suit, tailored to perfection, the kind that spoke of quiet power. His walk was measured, confident, his expression unreadable. The applause roared like thunder, but Olivia couldn't hear it. Her lungs refused to draw air. The man on stage was her husband, Daniel, her Daniel. For a long, impossible moment, she thought her mind had betrayed her, that she was hallucinating from stress. But then he looked at her, really looked, and his blue-gray eyes, those same eyes she had woken up next to for 7 years, met hers across the glittering room. And in that single glance, everything she'd ever believed about her life fractured. The audience was clapping, cheering. Daniel smiled politely, shaking hands with board members, moving toward her as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Cameras flashed like lightning. Olivia's throat constricted. He reached her, extending his hand. "Mrs. Hart," he said smoothly, his voice carrying that quiet authority she'd never heard before. It's a pleasure to finally meet in person." The words were a knife, cold, perfectly practiced. She forced her lips to move, but no sound came. Her hand trembled as she took his. His skin was warm, familiar, heartbreakingly familiar. And yet, the man standing before her wasn't her husband. He was a stranger wearing his face. Applause faded as Daniel turned to the audience. "At Synaxis, we value partnerships built on trust," he said. "This collaboration marks not only a milestone for innovation, but a testament to shared vision." Trust. The word slammed into her chest like a cruel joke. She barely remembered the rest of the ceremony. The speeches blurred. Her pulse roared in her ears. Her hands clenched until her nails left crescents in her palms. When the cameras turned toward her for the official handshake photo, she smiled a mechanical, frozen curve of lips and whispered through gritted teeth, "You lied to me." Daniel's gaze flickered for the briefest moment, something raw and guilty flashing behind his calm mask. But then he nodded almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "Not now." Afterward, she escaped to the backstage corridor, her heels clicking like gunshots against marble. She pushed open the door to the dressing lounge, slamming it behind her. Her chest heaved. The image of him standing tall under the spotlight, the world cheering for him, burned in her mind like acid. The door creaked open. "Olivia," his voice came softly. "Please, let me explain." She turned slowly, her eyes blazing. "Explain? Explain what? That the man I sleep next to every night, my husband, isn't some quiet consultant, but a billionaire CEO who's been lying to me for years?" Her voice cracked, sharp as glass. "What kind of game were you playing?" He stepped closer, his jaw tight, guilt clouding his expression. "I wasn't playing a game. I just didn't want you to love me because of that? Because of the money, the power. I wanted something real." Her laughter broke out, trembling, bitter. "You think this is real? You built a marriage on lies, Daniel, and you call it love?" He tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. Outside, applause echoed through the hall, again the press waiting, the world watching. Olivia grabbed a half-full glass of red wine from the table and, without a second thought, hurled it at him. The liquid splashed across his pristine white shirt, deep crimson spreading like a wound. Gasps rippled through the doorway where a few assistants stood frozen. Daniel didn't flinch. He just looked at her, sad, resigned, as though he'd known this was coming all along. Her hand trembled as she whispered, "I don't even know who you are." Then she walked past him, her heels clicking on marble, leaving him there wine-stained, silent, and utterly alone beneath the shimmer of fluorescent light. Outside, the cameras still flashed. The world was applauding the deal of the century. No one realized a marriage had just ended in the shadows behind the stage. The crimson stain spread across Daniel's white shirt like a slow-burning fire, vivid against the sterile brightness of the conference hall. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent. The cameras stopped clicking. The guest board members, journalists, executives in dark suits stared, frozen between disbelief and voyeuristic fascination. Olivia stood there, arm trembling, her breath sharp and uneven. The wine glass clattered to the floor, the sound shattering the silence like a gunshot. Her pulse hammered in her throat. The air smelled of spilled alcohol, expensive perfume, and humiliation. Daniel didn't move. He simply looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes, those familiar blue-gray eyes, steady and almost unbearably calm. His composure enraged her more than any argument could have. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't apologizing. He was just standing there, taking it as if this had all been inevitable. Someone whispered her name, "Olivia." But she didn't hear the rest. The walls closed in, the murmurs swelled, and 1,000 eyes burned into her. She turned and walked out, her heels cutting through the heavy silence, every step echoing like defiance. Outside, flashes exploded again, the press, alerted by the commotion. Someone shouted a question. Someone else recorded. Olivia kept walking, head high, every movement precise, mechanical, as though she could still control something in a life that had just spun out of control. The black car door slammed behind her. The driver hesitated before starting the engine, glancing at her through the mirror. Her hands were shaking in her lap, red stains still dotting her fingers. She pressed them together, trying to steady her breathing. "Home," she whispered. "Just take me home." The city slid by in fractured reflections, glass towers, billboards, rain streaking against tinted windows. Olivia stared at her own reflection, barely recognizing the woman looking back. Perfect hair undone, lipstick smudged, eyes hollow. Beneath the anger lay something far more dangerous, grief. When she reached the penthouse, the sky had already turned gray, the kind of heavy New York dusk that makes everything look colder. She kicked off her heels in the foyer, leaving them by the door. The apartment was still, almost too still. It smelled faintly of his cologne. Every corner of that place carried his presence, the books he stacked by the sofa, the coffee mug he always left half full on the counter, the jacket slung over the dining chair, the home they had built together, the illusion. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Notifications flooded the screen. Headlines were already spreading. Ad exec throws wine on billionaire CEO husband at 800 signing ceremony. Corporate scandal or love story gone wrong. Who is Olivia Hart? Her company's PR team was calling, her business partner. Even her assistant Lauren had left desperate messages. You need to issue a statement now. But Olivia couldn't move. She sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, numb. Each new headline was another knife twisting into her chest. Years of work, credibility, everything she had clawed her way toward reduced to a viral clip. And yet, what haunted her most wasn't the humiliation. It was the look in Daniel's eyes before she threw the wine, the quiet sadness, the guilt, the way he didn't defend himself, the way he seemed almost relieved that she finally knew. She rose, restless, pacing the living room. Her mind replayed every moment of their marriage with brutal clarity. The weekends when he'd said he had client meetings. The late-night phone calls he'd stepped away to take. The anonymous invitations to charity galas he always declined. She'd assumed it was shyness, that he preferred quiet to spectacle. But he hadn't been shy. He'd been hiding. The city lights blinked outside the window like indifferent stars. Olivia poured herself another glass of wine, her hands steady this time. The irony stung. The red liquid caught the lamplight, glimmering like blood. When the elevator chimed hours later, she didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She felt him before she heard him, the quiet, measured rhythm of his steps. "Olivia," Daniel said softly. His voice was lower than usual, tired. "We need to talk." She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here." "I know." He hesitated by the doorway, his shirt now changed, though she could still see the faint shadow of red where the stain had been. "But I had to see you." Her laugh was sharp, almost cruel. "To do what? Damage control? Or to make sure I haven't ruined your perfect reputation?" He took a breath. "You didn't ruin anything. I did." The simplicity of his words disarmed her. For a fleeting second, she saw not the CEO, but the man she used to wake up next. The one who brought her coffee in bed, who left notes in her briefcase before big meetings. But that man was gone. Or maybe he never existed at all. "Why, Daniel?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. "Why did you lie to me? For years?"
He looked at her, and there was something raw in his gaze, something stripped of the armor he wore in public. Because I didn't want you to love me for what I had. I wanted to know if you could love me when I was no one. Olivia blinked back tears, a bitter laugh breaking through. And you think this humiliation proves I did? I never meant for you to find out like that, he said quietly. I was going to tell you after the deal. He faltered. I didn't know how. Her voice softened for the first time, almost a whisper. You were supposed to be the one person who didn't lie to me. Daniel's jaw tightened. And you were the one person I couldn't bear to lose. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly over the Hudson. Olivia turned away, tears slipping down her cheeks. She didn't want him to see her break. You should go, she said. He nodded slowly, though his eyes lingered on her for a long moment. I'll fix this, he murmured. For you. For us. She didn't answer. When the door closed behind him, the apartment felt colder, emptier. Olivia sank to the floor, the wine glass still in her hand, her reflection fractured in the dark surface of the liquid. The next morning, her phone was filled with new messages. The story had exploded. Her face was on every business blog. Her company's stock had dipped, and journalists were waiting outside her building. In the glossy chaos of the headlines, they called her the woman who poured wine on her billionaire husband. No one wrote about the silence that followed, or the quiet ache of betrayal that filled her chest. No one saw the wound that bled unseen beneath the surface, the one not on Daniel's shirt, but in her heart. Because the truth wasn't just that her husband had lied. It was that she had loved him honestly, and that honesty had become her greatest mistake. The apartment was empty by morning. Only the faint scent of Olivia's perfume lingered in the air, a ghost of what once filled that home with laughter and warmth. The coffee maker on the counter stood untouched, the framed photographs removed from the shelves, leaving pale outlines where sunlight hadn't reached in years. Daniel stood in the center of the room, surrounded by silence. His tie hung loose around his neck. His shirt rumpled from another sleepless night. The city outside roared as usual, indifferent to the quiet collapse happening 30 stories above it. Olivia had left just after dawn. She hadn't told him where she was going, only that she needed space, time, and distance. The words had been calm, even polite. But her eyes had betrayed her. They were hollow, in a way that told him she was already gone long before she packed her suitcase. She moved into a hotel first, a sleek glass building in Midtown with polished marble floors and rooms that smelled of disinfectant and detachment. From her window, she could see the skyline that once represented ambition and success. Now it only reminded her of how small she felt in a city where everyone was chasing something, even if it meant losing themselves along the way. The scandal had cooled on social media, but the embers still glowed. The video of her throwing wine had been clipped, edited, turned into memes. She avoided looking at her phone. Instead, she buried herself in work, attending crisis meetings, damage control sessions, and PR strategy briefings. Her company needed her. And ironically, the company she now needed to collaborate with by contract was still Daniel's. They had signed legally binding documents before the truth surfaced. The partnership between her agency and Synaxis Tech was now official, and dissolving it would cost millions. Neither of them could afford that, not financially and not publicly. So they continued. The first time she saw him again was 2 weeks later, in a sterile conference room at Synaxis headquarters. The air conditioning hummed too loudly. Everyone was tense, overly polite, as if afraid to breathe wrong. Olivia took her seat across the table, her expression professional, her blouse crisp white, her posture immaculate. She looked every bit the executive she had worked so hard to become: strong, composed,
untouchable. Daniel walked in 5 minutes late. He wore a dark suit, his hair slightly longer, his expression unreadable. The team rose in respect. He nodded, thanked them, and sat at the head of the table. For a second, their eyes met. Neither spoke. The presentation began. Numbers, projections, marketing angles, product integrations, voices filled the space, but none of it registered fully for Olivia. She could feel him across the room like gravity. Every word he spoke, every shift in his tone, made her heart ache in quiet defiance. He was good, too good. Calm, measured, confident. The kind of man the world admired and she could no longer trust. At one point, he said, "We'll leave creative control to Hart & Cody. Olivia's team understands the brand better than anyone." Her chest tightened. He still used her name in that same soft way, as if the syllables still belonged to him. After the meeting, she packed her notes quickly, intent on leaving before anyone could force them into awkward small talk. But when the others filed out, Daniel lingered. "Olivia," he said quietly. She froze. "Mr. Reeves." The title cut like a blade. A flicker of pain crossed his face. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted. "Because that's who you are now. The CEO, the client, nothing else." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "I understand." But he didn't. Neither of them did. That night, Olivia sat in her hotel room, the city lights bleeding through the glass. The wine glass on the nightstand remained untouched. She had thought anger would fade with distance, but it only changed shape, turning into something quieter, heavier. Loneliness crept in like a shadow that refused to leave. As she stared out at the skyline, her mind betrayed her. It went back to the early years, when everything between them had been soft and bright. They had met in college, two overworked students surviving on caffeine and ambition. Daniel wasn't the billionaire heir back then, at least not to her. He had introduced himself as Daniel Reeve, dropping the S from his real surname, an innocent lie that would later grow into a fortress of deception. He wore second-hand clothes, lived in a shared apartment, and worked nights tutoring economics. She remembered their first date in a small diner on East 10th Street, where the booths were cracked and the air smelled like burnt coffee. He had smiled at her across the table, shy but genuine. "You know," she had said, teasing, "you talk like a man who's already figured everything out." He'd laughed. "I haven't figured out anything, Olivia. I just know what I don't want to become." "What's that?" she'd asked. "My father," he'd said softly. Back then, she didn't know what he meant. She didn't know his father was Harold Reeves, the infamous magnate who built an empire on deceit, greed, and scandal. She didn't know the shame that name carried for him, or the fear that followed. It wasn't until much later, after they'd married, that she understood how deep that wound went. Daniel had grown up watching his mother cry behind locked doors, watching his father destroy people for profit. He had sworn to become someone different, to earn everything himself, to be loved without the shadow of money. But in doing so, he had built a lie so elaborate that it swallowed them both. In another flash of memory, she saw him sitting beside her on their old apartment floor, eating takeout from paper boxes after a long day. He had looked at her and said, "You're the first person who makes me forget who I'm supposed to be." At the time, she thought it was romantic. Now she realized it was a confession. The knock on her hotel door startled her back to the present. It was late past midnight. She hesitated, then opened it slightly. Lauren stood there, holding a laptop. "You need to see this," she said. Olivia frowned. "What is it?" Lauren hesitated. "Synaxis just released a joint press statement. Daniel's taking full responsibility for the leak and the scandal. He called it a personal failure of transparency. He's protecting you, Liv." Olivia stared at the screen, her throat tight. The article's headline read, "Reeves acknowledges personal misjudgment. praises partner's integrity. He was doing exactly what he'd always done, carrying the burden alone. She closed the laptop, her voice flat. It doesn't change anything. But when Lauren left, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, her eyes fixed on the reflection of the city beyond the window. No matter how far she moved, his shadow followed. No matter how hard she tried to bury the past, it kept bleeding through the silence. And somewhere deep down, beneath the anger and the betrayal, she hated herself for still missing the man who had broken her heart. The air inside the conference room was still and brittle, like glass about to crack. Morning light poured through the wide windows, flooding the space with a sharp brilliance that made everything look colder. Olivia sat at the far end of the table, flipping through the new campaign drafts, pretending not to notice the man seated opposite her. But every breath, every heartbeat betrayed her. She could feel Daniel's presence, as if the room itself leaned toward him. 3 months had passed since the scandal, and yet the silence between them still felt new, every day sharp, awkward, impossible to fill. Their team spoke for them now. Their conversations filtered through polite intermediaries. They met in rooms filled with words but devoid of voice. "Let's move on to the partnership rollout schedule," one of the project leads said, nervously clicking his pen. Daniel nodded slightly, his tone calm, controlled. "We'll begin testing the digital campaign next week. Ms. Hart's creative direction remains our priority." Ms. Hart. The title still cut through her every time. Olivia kept her expression steady, though her fingers trembled beneath the table. He always spoke about her work with respect, almost reverence. He never criticized, never contradicted. He was, in public, the perfect professional. But that perfection only deepened the ache in her chest. It reminded her of what they used to have, of the way he once looked at her across a dinner table, eyes soft, voice low, laughing at her terrible jokes. After the meeting, she packed her things quickly, hoping to escape before the mask of professionalism cracked. But as she turned toward the door, Daniel's voice stopped her. "Olivia?" Her body stilled. She didn't look back. "I need 5 minutes," he said. "Please." She hesitated. The word please hung in the air like an old memory. She sighed, placed her folder down, and turned. "You have 3. He approached slowly, as if afraid she might vanish if he came too close. He looked older, more tired than she remembered, dark shadows beneath his eyes, a stiffness in his shoulders. He had always been composed, but now there was something fragile beneath that calm. "I never wanted to hurt you," he began quietly. "You have to know that." "I don't have to know anything," she said, her voice sharp but not unkind. "I thought if I told you who I was, you'd see me differently," he continued, almost pleading now. "You'd look at me and see my father, the power, the money, everything I ran from. I didn't want that to touch us." Her laugh was soft, bitter. "You didn't want it to touch you, Daniel, but it touched me anyway. You lied to me, and then you made me the face of your deceit." He closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. "I know. I keep asking myself where it went wrong. Maybe it started before we even met. Maybe I was already too afraid to be loved honestly." The honesty in his voice disarmed her. For a moment, she saw the Daniel she had fallen in love with, the man who once cooked for her in their tiny apartment, who used to read her drafts late at night and leave notes in the margins. "You're brilliant. Don't forget it." She looked away quickly, afraid he might see the softness flicker in her eyes. "You can't rewrite this, Daniel. Not with excuses or regret." "I'm not trying to," he said quietly. "I just want you to understand that the man you hate, he's still the one who loves you." The words hung between them, heavy and dangerous. She wanted to throw them back at him, to say they meant nothing now.
But the truth was, they did. They meant everything. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say that. You don't get to love me after this." He didn't reply. He only nodded, his throat tightening as if he were swallowing something sharp. Then, with that familiar quiet dignity, he turned and walked out. When the door closed, Olivia sat down slowly. Her hands were cold. Her heart felt heavier than it had in months. That night, back in her apartment, a smaller one now, tucked above a bookstore in Soho, she stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was composed, elegant, successful, but her eyes were softer than before, uncertain. She hated that she still missed him, hated that a part of her still wanted to reach out. The mirror didn't lie, but it didn't tell the whole truth either. She remembered how, in the early days, Daniel would stand behind her as she got ready for work, his hands brushing her shoulders, his reflection beside hers. He'd say, "You look like the woman I prayed I'd never lose." Back then, she'd laughed it off. Now the memory stung. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Lauren. "Liv, you need to see this," her assistant said when Olivia picked up. "Someone just leaked an internal memo from Synaxis. It's strange." Olivia frowned. What kind of memo? The kind that suggests the entire signing scandal wasn't random. She opened her laptop, her pulse quickening. The document was already circulating online, an internal email thread from Synaxis' senior management, dated weeks before the signing event. The message hinted that someone from within the company had tipped off the media about Daniel's hidden identity before the ceremony. The sender's name was partially redacted, but the tone was unmistakable, manipulative, calculated. It wasn't an accident. Someone had wanted that secret to explode. Olivia's stomach twisted. She remembered the way Daniel had looked at her that day, surprised, yes, but not shocked. He hadn't expected her reaction. He'd expected something else, something worse. She called Lauren back. "Who leaked this?" "No one knows yet," Lauren said. "But rumor is, someone on the board is trying to push Daniel out. This could be part of it." Olivia leaned back in her chair, staring at the glowing screen. For the first time in months, the anger inside her shifted no longer just at Daniel, but at the world that had turned their private life into a weapon. What if he hadn't betrayed her alone? What if he'd been betrayed too? The thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She closed the laptop and stood by the window, looking out over the quiet street below. The city glimmered beneath the rain, distant and merciless. Somewhere out there, Daniel was fighting battles she couldn't see: corporate wars, political games, shadows of power. And for all her anger, a part of her couldn't stand the thought of him standing there alone. When she finally went to bed, sleep wouldn't come. The words he'd spoken that morning echoed in her mind. "The man you hate is still the one who loves you." She hated how true it sounded, hated how much she still cared. Because love, she realized, wasn't something that ended cleanly when the truth came out. It lingered in the spaces between anger and silence, in the memories that refused to fade. It was the wound that never closed, the mirror that never stopped reflecting what once was. And somewhere, deep down, Olivia wondered if the lie that destroyed them wasn't the biggest one after all, but the love that refused to die. The night the storm came was the kind of night that felt almost personal, violent, electric, as if the sky itself were arguing. Rain pounded against the high windows of the Synaxis Tower, blurring the city into streaks of silver and shadow. Inside the top-floor conference room, Olivia stood alone before the glass wall, watching lightning tear open the clouds above Manhattan. Her reflection flickered back at her, a woman of poise and precision, but behind her calm face, something was cracking. The meeting had stretched into midnight. The contract revisions had grown messy, tense, fueled by exhaustion and pride.
Daniel was still there, seated at the end of the long oak table, his tie loosened, his eyes dark and tired. They had barely spoken to each other beyond work for weeks, both pretending professionalism could drown the ache underneath. But tonight, the storm outside had found its way in. "Let's call it a night," one of the legal advisors said, rubbing his temples. "We'll finalize the clauses tomorrow." Daniel nodded. "Go ahead. I'll stay a while. There's still a few points to cross-check." Olivia gathered her papers, pretending not to hear him. She wanted to leave God. She needed to, but something in his tone made her pause. The others filed out, their footsteps fading into the corridor until the only sounds left were the storm's fury and the low hum of city power beneath it. "Still trying to control everything," she muttered under her breath, half to herself. Daniel looked up. "What's that supposed to mean?" She turned toward him, her eyes sharp and glistening. "It means you haven't changed. You still sit there like you own the world, pretending this is just business when you know it's not." His jaw tightened. "Olivia, I've tried." "Tried?" She laughed, the sound brittle. "You lied to me for 2 years, Daniel. You built a life on a lie. And you think trying fixes that?" "I didn't mean for it to happen that way," he said quietly. "Then how did you mean for it to happen?" she snapped, stepping closer. "Were you planning to keep pretending until the contract signed itself? Until I had no choice but to find out who my husband really was in front of cameras?" He rose from his chair slowly. "You think I wanted that?" His voice trembled slightly, the calm finally beginning to crack. "Do you think I wanted to watch you look at me like I was a stranger? That day destroyed me too, Olivia." "Destroyed you?" she whispered, her anger deepening into disbelief. "You did this. You built this lie and wrapped me in it. You stood by while I humiliated myself in front of the entire industry." Lightning flared behind her, illuminating them both in brief, violent flashes. Daniel's face was pale, drawn, his expression a mixture of guilt and exhaustion. "I was going to tell you," he said finally, his voice low, raw. "The night before the signing, I had everything ready. I even rehearsed how I'd say it. But then you came home, and you were so happy, so proud. You said it was the biggest moment of your career, and I realized that if I told you, I might lose you before you ever got to celebrate." Her breath caught, a wave of pain rising in her chest. "So you decided to wait until after the cameras caught me?" He shook his head, his voice breaking. "No, I thought I could manage it, that maybe the truth could wait one more day. I was wrong. God, I was so wrong." Olivia's lips trembled, but she pressed them together, forcing herself not to break. "You didn't just lie to me about who you were, Daniel. You lied every time you said you trusted me. You made me feel small, as if I wasn't part of your real world." "I didn't want you in that world," he said, stepping closer. "The board, the power plays, the greed, it's poison. Liv, I wanted you untouched by it. You were the only real thing in my life. I thought if I could keep my name out of it, I could keep you." Her eyes shimmered, fury and grief mixing like storm water and oil. "You don't get to say my name like that. You don't get to make me your excuse for a lie." He stopped, the space between them heavy with unsaid things. Rain lashed against the glass so hard it sounded like applause from ghosts. "I know," he whispered, "but I loved you more than I loved the truth, and that's my greatest sin." The silence that followed was unbearable. She stared at him, searching his face for the man she used to know, for the boyish grin, the warmth in his voice, the way his hands once found hers in the dark. But all she saw now was a stranger who looked like him, broken and pleading. "Do you even hear yourself?" she said softly. "You talk about love like it's a weapon you couldn't control. But love isn't supposed to destroy trust, Daniel. It's supposed to deserve it." He closed his eyes, his shoulders shaking slightly. "I know.
And I would give anything, everything to go back and tell you the truth that first night. But you didn't, she said, voice steady now, colder. You let fear decide for both of us. The storm roared outside, thunder rolling over the glass tower like a growl from the heavens. Daniel took another step forward, then stopped when he saw the tears glistening on her cheeks. She didn't bother to wipe them away. Olivia. His voice broke on her name. Tell me what I can do, please. Tell me how to make this right. She shook her head slowly. You can't fix something that was never real to begin with. He flinched as if struck, his expression hollowing out. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she turned, gathering her papers with trembling hands, and walked toward the door. As she reached it, he spoke again softly, desperately. I didn't marry you for your name, or your success, or your beauty. I married you because when I looked at you, I finally saw a life that wasn't built on lies. And that's what kills me most. I ruined the only honest thing I ever had. She stopped, her back to him, her breath unsteady. The words struck something deep inside her, but she didn't turn around. Then maybe the truth is all that's left of us now, she said quietly, and that has to be enough. When the door closed behind her, Daniel sank into his chair, his face buried in his hands. The storm outside had reached its peak, thunder shaking the windows as if the world itself were breaking apart. Down on the street, Olivia stepped into the rain without an umbrella, letting the cold water soak through her coat, through her skin, through the wall she had tried to build around her heart. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't breathe in that room anymore. Her tears mixed with the rain, indistinguishable, both the same salt and sorrow. And as lightning fractured the sky above her, she realized the cruel truth. This wasn't just the end of trust. It was the breaking point of two hearts that had once been whole. Neither would ever be the same again. The following weeks unfolded like a slow unraveling of silk, smooth on the surface, but tearing beneath the strain. News of the wine scandal had not yet died down. Olivia's photo, eyes blazing, red wine cascading down Daniel's suit, was still circulating on business gossip blogs and LinkedIn think pieces disguised as moral lessons. The story had evolved into a narrative of betrayal, ego, and ambition, each outlet telling it differently, but all agreeing on one thing. The marriage between Daniel and Olivia Hart was over. Inside Synaxis Tower, whispers followed them through every corridor. Meetings grew tense. Every time Olivia entered a room, conversation dipped for a moment before awkwardly resuming. People pretended not to stare, not to wonder. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't possibly see, was the quiet war happening behind closed doors. Daniel had been summoned to the boardroom 3 times in a single week. The council of directors, older men with eyes polished from decades of politics, sat around the glass table with folded hands and carefully measured tones. "Daniel," said Leonard Price, the chairman, his voice oily but calm, "we all sympathize with your personal challenges. However, the company's image has taken a severe hit. Investors are nervous. They don't trust instability." Daniel sat perfectly still, back straight, eyes fixed on the skyline outside. "Instability," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "You understand what we're saying," another director added. "Olivia Hart must be removed from the campaign. Her continued involvement is provocative. It reminds people of the scandal every time they see her name next to ours." Daniel finally turned his gaze on them. "She's the creative director behind this project," he said. "The entire brand concept came from her team. Removing her would jeopardize everything we've built." Price leaned forward, voice hardening. "This isn't about merit, Daniel. It's about optics. You can replace her and claim it was a restructuring decision. The narrative dies and we move forward. If you don't, well,
The board will have to reconsider your position." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy as smoke. Rain pressed gently against the windows, soft but relentless. Daniel's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into a fist beneath the table. "I won't fire her," he said finally, each word deliberate, controlled, dangerous in its calm. "Not to save my name, not to protect your optics. She stays." "Daniel," Price said softly, "this is not love we're talking about. It's business." Daniel's eyes flickered with something fierce. "You're wrong. It's both." The room fell silent. The decision sealed itself in the quiet that followed. That night, word spread quickly through the company. Within hours, the rumor took shape. Daniel Reed, the untouchable CEO, had defied the board for the woman who once humiliated him in front of the entire industry. By morning, a temporary suspension was announced officially to allow for a review of corporate leadership conduct. Unofficially, everyone knew what it meant. Olivia found out through an email. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, reading the message 3 times, her pulse a slow drum in her chest. When she reached the end, when she saw the note that Daniel had stepped aside voluntarily, her throat tightened until she couldn't breathe. She didn't go to his office. She couldn't. Not yet. But she saw him later that day, standing in the lobby of Synaxis Tower, coat draped over one arm, face pale but strangely peaceful. Their eyes met across the glass atrium, and the world seemed to pause. For a moment, all the noise of the city, the tapping heels, the elevators, the phones ringing fell away. "Daniel," she whispered when she finally reached him, her voice low, trembling. "What did you do?" He gave her a faint smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What I should have done a long time ago," he said softly. "Protect you." "By losing everything?" she asked, incredulous. "By giving them exactly what they wanted?" He shrugged slightly. "They wanted your name off the project. Now they can have mine instead." Olivia's breath hitched. "You didn't have to do that for me." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." The way he looked at her, gentle, tired, unguarded, made her chest ache in a way that scared her. She wanted to hate him, to stay angry, but what she saw in his eyes wasn't pride or manipulation anymore. It was loss. It was love stripped of every defense. "Why?" she asked finally. "After everything, after I threw wine at you, after I called you a liar in front of everyone, why would you still do this?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because I'm not trying to win anymore. I'm trying to atone." She closed her eyes. The rain outside the glass walls streaked downward like tears across the city's face. In the following days, Daniel's absence spread through the company like a chill. People whispered his name in the hallways, some with pity, some with awe. Investors scrambled to stabilize the fallout. Olivia, meanwhile, found herself suddenly in charge of salvaging the campaign, a role she hadn't asked for, but one she couldn't refuse. Every morning, she walked past Daniel's empty office, its door closed but not locked. Sometimes she'd stop, hand hovering near the handle, wondering if he'd left anything behind. She never opened it. Yet each time she entered a meeting, she felt his ghost there, his quiet strength, his measured voice, the way he used to catch her eye when she doubted herself. And somewhere deep inside, something began to shift. One evening, after another grueling day of crisis management, she sat alone in the dimly lit creative suite, surrounded by sketches and mood boards. Her team had gone home. The city lights shimmered through the rain-streaked window, blurring into gold and blue. She picked up a folder one Daniel had given her, months ago, when they first started the campaign. Inside were her notes, his annotations, a few sticky notes scrawled in his handwriting. Push for more honesty in the tone. Let emotion drive the brand story. Tears welled in her eyes. He had always believed in her work sometimes more than she believed in herself. And now, he had lost everything to keep her reputation intact. The thought hollowed her. It made her realize how much pride had blinded her too. She had been so focused on her humiliation, her anger, her sense of betrayal that she never saw his fear, his love, his brokenness. He wasn't innocent, but he wasn't the villain she made him out to be. He was a man who had loved her imperfectly too secretly, too protectively, but genuinely. That night, Olivia finally walked to his office. She turned the knob and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of cedar and rain. His desk was cleared except for one small object, a framed photo of them at their wedding, laughing, eyes bright with a kind of innocence that now felt like another lifetime. She picked up the frame, tracing her thumb over his smile. For the first time in weeks, her tears fell freely. "Damn you, Daniel," she whispered. "You never did know how to love halfway." Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered like love itself, refusing to die even after the world had moved on. And in that quiet office, surrounded by everything they had built and broken, Olivia finally understood what the price of pride truly was. Not the loss of reputation or power, but the loss of the person who loved you enough to burn everything just to keep you standing. The truth didn't come to Olivia. In one revelation, it crept in slowly, like light through the cracks of a closed door. It started with a folder, one that had been misplaced during Daniel's suspension. She wasn't supposed to find it. It had been left in a stack of old project archives in the creative suite, tucked between marketing reports and budget notes. But when she saw the name Reed Holdings embossed on the cover, she froze. She knew that name. It was Daniel's father's company, the empire that had collapsed years ago amid whispers of corruption, fraud, and something darker. She remembered the headlines faintly from her college years. Reed Dynasty Crumbles, CEO under federal investigation. She hadn't connected it before. Daniel had never spoken about his family, not really. Whenever she'd asked, he would change the subject, kissing her temple and murmuring, "Some stories aren't worth retelling." Now, sitting alone in her office, Olivia opened the folder. The pages were yellowed at the edges, full of reports and testimony, evidence of bribes, falsified documents, and cover-ups. There were photos, too, of a younger Daniel standing beside his father at shareholder meetings, his eyes dim, his smile brittle. And then, the article that made her chest constrict. Nathaniel. Reed dies by suicide amid scandal. She read it twice, her pulse pounding. The pieces began to fit together. His fear of being known, his obsession with privacy, his constant avoidance of wealth's trappings. He hadn't been hiding his power from her out of arrogance. He had been hiding from the shadow of his father's sins. Olivia leaned back in her chair, the room spinning slightly. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel anger. She felt something heavier: pity, sadness, the ache of realization. The storm inside her quieted into something hollow. By nightfall, she found herself standing in front of the glass doors of Daniel's penthouse. She hadn't planned it. Her body had moved before her mind had caught up. The building loomed above the East River, its facade shimmering under the city lights. Inside, the doorman recognized her, but said nothing, only nodding quietly as she passed. The elevator ride felt endless. Each floor ascended with a soft chime, and with each one, her breath grew shallower. When the doors opened, she stepped into silence. The penthouse was dimly lit, curtains drawn, no music, no life. The air smelled faintly of rain and scotch. It was too clean, too empty, like a museum of someone who had already left. Daniel sat on the floor near the massive window, his back against the wall, still in the same suit he'd worn at the board hearing. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly unkempt. He didn't look up when she entered. "I figured you'd come eventually," he said quietly, his voice rough, as if unused for days. Olivia hesitated in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room. The once grand living space, marble floors, abstract art, panoramic views now looked sterile, cold, the kind of wealth that suddenly meant nothing. "I shouldn't be here," she said softly, though her feet carried her closer. He gave a faint, humorless smile. "You're the only one who ever belonged here." She stopped a few feet away from him, uncertain whether to sit or stand. "You lied to me," she said after a moment, her voice trembling. "But now I know why." Daniel's head turned slightly, his gaze finally meeting hers. His eyes were red, tired, haunted. "You found out." She nodded. "About your father. About everything." He laughed under his breath, quiet, bitter. "Of course you did. You always find the truth, even when I tried to bury it." "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, and her tone wasn't angry this time, just tired. "You could have trusted me with that." "I couldn't," he said. "You didn't see what it did to people, Liv. The Reed name, it destroyed everything it touched. When the investigation started, my mother left. The press camped outside our house for months. I was 19 when my father died, and every headline called him a monster. They weren't wrong, but they didn't care what that made me. I didn't want to carry that name anymore. I wanted to disappear." Olivia swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "So you changed it, hid it." "I built Synaxis from nothing," he said, his voice distant. "I wanted to prove that I wasn't him, that I could build something honest, something good, and for a while I did, until I met you." Her brow furrowed. "Until me?" He looked up, his expression raw. "You were everything I wanted to deserve but never could. I thought if you knew where I came from, you'd look at me differently, like everyone else did. So I told myself it didn't matter, that we could have a normal life if I just stayed silent." Olivia felt tears sting her eyes. "You didn't trust that I could love you despite it." He shook his head. "No, I didn't trust myself not to ruin it." The words hung between them, fragile and heavy. Olivia crossed her arms, hugging herself. "You've been living like a ghost, Daniel, haunted by something that isn't even yours to carry anymore." He exhaled shakily, turning his gaze back to the city. "Maybe, but ghosts don't ask for forgiveness." Lightning flickered across the skyline, painting the room in a flash of white. She could see his reflection in the window, small, lonely, surrounded by all the things he thought would protect him. "Do you still love me?" she asked quietly. The question escaped before she could stop it. Daniel closed his eyes, his throat working. "Every second," he said. "Even when I don't deserve to." The confession landed between them like a slow, breaking wave. Olivia wanted to hate him again, to remind herself of every wound he'd caused, but her anger had no place in this room anymore. What she saw wasn't deceit or power. It was a man hollowed by his past, stripped of everything except regret. She moved closer, kneeling in front of him. "You built your whole life trying not to be your father," she whispered, "and in the process, you forgot how to just be yourself." He looked at her then, really looked, his eyes full of disbelief and a hint of something fragile, like hope. "I'm sorry, Olivia," he said, "for everything, for the lies, for the fear, for making you part of my ghosts." Her hands trembled slightly, but she reached out anyway, brushing his sleeve with her fingertips. "You can't undo what's done," she said softly, "but maybe you can stop punishing yourself for it." They sat in silence for a long time, the sound of rain filling the space where words had failed. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, reflections breaking across their faces like distant stars. For the first time in months, Olivia didn't see a CEO or a liar. She saw Daniel the man
who had once fallen asleep beside her on the couch with an unfinished novel in his lap, who had cooked her breakfast at 2 a.m. after her first promotion, who had believed in her even when she doubted herself. And now, seeing him like this bare, broken human, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was understanding. When she finally stood to leave, Daniel didn't stop her. He only said, "Thank you for coming." At the door, she turned one last time. "Don't disappear again," she said softly. "You've done that long enough." Then she was gone, leaving him alone in the penthouse, surrounded by the echo of his father's empire and the faint scent of her perfume, like memory refusing to fade. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was clearing, though neither of them knew yet whether it meant the storm was truly over or just beginning again in a different way. The gala shimmered like a dream built on glass and light. It was held in the new Synaxis Tower atrium, a masterpiece of steel and reflection, the kind of place where every surface seemed to double the grandeur of the people inside. It had been exactly 1 year since the scandal, 1 year since Daniel Reed's name vanished from the company press releases, and 1 year since Olivia last saw him. The world had moved on. The company had survived. Olivia had survived. She arrived in a sleek black gown, understated but elegant, her hair pulled back in the same effortless way that made people turn twice. Her name carried weight now, not because of Daniel, but because of her own brilliance. The campaign she had saved after his resignation had become a case study in resilience. People whispered words like visionary and comeback queen when she walked past. And yet, beneath the soft murmur of conversation, beneath the champagne and praise, a quiet part of her felt hollow. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was a kind of ache that came from having once loved deeply and knowing that love still breathed somewhere out there in the dark. She wandered through the crowd, nodding politely, smiling when needed. The event pulsed with music and chatter, all designed to celebrate Synaxis's new chapter. But when she turned toward the far side of the hall, she froze. Daniel was there. He stood beside the enormous glass wall that overlooked the city, tall, impeccably dressed, though thinner now, his face more angular. The faint streaks of gray in his hair caught the light. He wasn't surrounded by admirers anymore. He stood quietly, a glass of sparkling water in hand, watching the city move far below. For a long time, Olivia couldn't move. She just stared. The world around her blurred into a soft hum. Then, slowly, she began to walk toward him. He saw her coming. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, an old warmth flickering beneath layers of restraint. When she reached him, there was a pane of glass between them, dividing the terrace and the inner hall. He had stepped outside for air. She stayed inside, where it was warm. They faced each other through the clear divide, their reflections overlapping two ghosts standing in the same place, but separated by silence and circumstance. Daniel lifted his glass slightly in greeting. "You look." He paused, searching for the right word, like someone who finally slept. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that holds both affection and distance. "You look like someone who stopped running." A small laugh escaped him, quiet, genuine. "Maybe I have." For a moment, they just stood there, the hum of the gala fading around them. The city glittered behind him, the river glinting in the distance like a vein of light. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said softly. "I wasn't sure I'd come," he admitted. "But when I heard Synaxis was dedicating the new wing to integrity and transparency, I thought, well, maybe I should witness that irony firsthand." She shook her head, a faint laugh breaking through her chest. Still the same dry humor. "Not entirely," he said. His gaze softened. "You changed things here, Olivia. The company's different now. You made it honest. I'm proud of you." Her throat tightened. I didn't do it alone. What you built the foundation, it's still yours, whether they admit it or not. He looked away, the city lights flickering across his face. Maybe once, but it's better this way. I don't need my name on glass anymore. They fell into silence again. The glass between them reflected everything: the light, the crowd, the memories. Olivia's hand hovered near the pane, her fingers only inches from his. She could almost feel the warmth radiating through, but not quite. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The company, the power, all of it? Daniel's eyes found hers again. No, he said simply. I miss the mornings we used to have before the lies. Her breath hitched slightly. The memory rose unbidden, those early hours in their apartment. Coffee brewing, sunlight filtering through blinds, his arm draped over her as if the world couldn't touch them. Those mornings had felt infinite. You know, she said quietly, for a long time I hated you for taking that away. I hated myself for the same reason, he said. But hate's a strange thing, isn't it? It keeps you tethered to what you're trying to escape. She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping. It's exhausting. Yeah. His voice was low, almost tender. It is. A long pause settled between them. The sound of laughter from the party drifted faintly through the glass. Someone inside was giving a speech, toasting to a new era. But here, on the edge of the noise, time felt suspended. Daniel shifted, setting his glass on the railing. I heard you're moving to San Francisco, he said. She smiled faintly. New beginnings. He studied her, as if memorizing her all over again. You always were brave enough to start over. She looked up at him. And you? He gave a soft, almost rueful smile. I'm still learning how. Something in her chest broke quietly, then not painfully, but like a knot finally loosening. They stood like that, facing each other, the night pressing close, the glass still between them. I wish things had been different, she whispered. He shook his head slowly. If they had been, we might never have seen who we really were. Her eyes shimmered under the soft light. Maybe, but part of me still wishes we'd had one more morning. He smiled, a sad, beautiful smile. Maybe one day we will. In another life. Olivia pressed her hand lightly against the glass. The cool surface met her skin, separating them by less than an inch, yet feeling like miles. Daniel hesitated, then lifted his hand, placing it opposite hers. The faint outline of their palms overlapped, two blurred shapes connected by reflection. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't ruin the fragile peace of that moment. The air between them pulsed with everything unsaid. Love, regret, forgiveness, the quiet possibility that maybe this wasn't an ending, but a kind of grace. Inside, someone called her name. The sound broke the spell. Olivia turned slightly, her hand slipping away from the glass. Goodbye, Daniel, she said softly. He nodded. Take care of yourself, Liv. She hesitated, her eyes lingering on him one last time. Then she walked away, disappearing into the crowd, her reflection fading from the glass like the final echo of a dream. Daniel remained where he was, staring at the faint handprint she'd left behind. The city stretched out before him, endless and luminous, alive with noise and light. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace, not because she had returned to him, but because she had forgiven him enough to let go. He turned back to the skyline, his breath fogging faintly against the glass, and whispered into the night, "Thank you." Beyond the glass wall, the reflections of the gala lights shimmered and blurred until the whole room looked like it was made of water, unsteady, shifting, impossibly beautiful. And somewhere between the city and the sky, between the love they lost and the lives they were still learning to live, forgiveness hung in the air, weightless, uncertain, but real. Whether they would ever meet again, neither of them knew. But for now, that silent moment behind the glass was enough. It was their ending and their beginning,